The mop handle left a wet streak across the floor of Ward 7C, and the woman pushing it didn't look up when the charge nurse walked past. As how Siobhan Doyle survived her shifts at Ridgemont General. Eyes down. Work done. Invisible. She was 33 years old, held a Cerny degree from Dalhousie, and had spent the last 8 months cleaning floors because the licensing board in Ontario had suspended her registration pending review. The review was now in its 7th month, and nobody had told her why. She'd stopped asking, and smelled. The ward smelled the way all wards smelled. Antiseptic, and something underneath it that antiseptic never quite reached. Siobhan had worked in worse conditions. She knew, without thinking about it, exactly how long it had been since the portable defibrillator in the supply closet had been serviced. She knew because she'd checked, out of habit, the first week she arrived, and into the name. The sticker on the back read 14 months. She'd mentioned it to the head of facilities. He'd nodded and walked away, and the sticker still read 14 months. She was wringing out the mop near the nurse's station when she heard it. Not the words at first, just the tone. The careful, too-measured tone that people used when they were explaining something they'd already decided. Charge Nurse Hartley was talking to a patient's family in the corridor. Older man, early 70s, sitting in a wheelchair with the papery look of someone who'd been in hospital too long. He spoke. His daughter stood beside him, gripping the chair handle. Hartley was explaining, in that tone, that the delay in his cardiac imaging had been unavoidable, due to equipment scheduling, and was being monitored, that everything was monitored, that there was nothing to worry about. And Siobhan set down the mop. Recognized the patient. Room 704. Admitted 11 days ago with unstable angina. She'd mopped his room every morning and every afternoon. She'd noticed, because she couldn't help noticing, that his chart trolley outside the door showed the same yellow flag it had shown on day 4. Pending cardiology review. 11 days, same flag. Medinichi, she walked over. Hartley glanced at her. The look was brief and total, the kind that said, "You are a porter, and you are interrupting something." Siobhan addressed the daughter. "Has anyone explained to your father's care team that he had an episode last night? Around 2 in the morning?" Her blinked. Yes. He woke up with chest pain. The night nurse said it was anxiety. And anxiety. Siobhan kept her voice low. The oximetry readings at that hour, the pattern of his symptoms over the past 4 days, someone needs to pull his overnight telemetry and look at it. Today. Not tomorrow. Hartley stepped between them. "Excuse me." "I'm finishing the floor." Siobhan said, and picked up the mop. "In the supply closet." She was back in the supply closet when Hartley found her. "Only inappropriate." "Miss, I know." "Does me." "You are not clinical staff. You do not speak to patients or their families about their care. You are aware of this." "I'm aware." "And why?" "His flag has been yellow for 11 days, and nobody's pulled his telemetry." Siobhan met her eyes. "I'm sorry. I'll stay in my lane." Hartley stared at her for a moment, then left. "Come in." The next morning, the man in room 704 was transferred to the cardiac unit for emergency catheterization. His daughter stopped Siobhan in the hallway and pressed her hand. Siobhan nodded and kept walking. A butter's drawn. 2 weeks later, she was called into the office of the hospital's operations director. Guide, Maine. His name was Aldous Prentice. 54 years old, the kind of man who'd spent 20 years building a fiefdom out of middle management and resented anyone who reminded him it was still just middle management. His office had framed certificates on the wall that nobody had asked about, and a desk kept so clean. It looked like a statement. He didn't offer her a seat. Alt spoke. "There have been concerns," Prentice said, "about your conduct on the ward." Siobhan waited. "Owens." You've been observed speaking to patients, questioning clinical decisions, and generally behaving in a manner inconsistent with your role here. He folded his hands. You were hired as a patient care aide. Your nursing registration is suspended. You have no clinical authority in this building. And I'm aware of that. I flagged a safety concern. I didn't place any orders or administer any treatment. You undermined the confidence of a patient's family and the care team. You created unnecessary alarm. 12 hours after that conversation, Prentice's expression didn't change. That's not the point. What is the point? He opened a folder on the desk. There have been 4 formal complaints about you in 8 months, from Hartley. From 2 physicians who say you've questioned their decisions in front of patients, and from the facilities team, who say you've been filing written safety concerns to an external email address. He looked up. Which external address? Siobhan said nothing. We have a right to know if hospital information is being shared externally. Complaints I filed were to the Provincial Patient Safety Office. That's a public body. It's not confidential. She kept her voice level, and everything I reported was observable from the corridor. Nothing clinical, nothing private. Prentice closed the folder. You're terminated effective today. We'll process your final pay within 5 business days. Security will escort you out. On his phone, he pressed a button on his phone. Siobhan stood in his office and felt something that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite relief. She'd known this was coming. She'd known it since the defibrillator sticker. After minutes, she cleaned out her locker without speaking to anyone. A porter named Desmond, who'd always nodded at her in the hallways, gave her a long look from across the change room. She picked up her jacket and her thermos and her dog-eared copy of Atul Gawande's Being Mortal and walked out through the service entrance into the gray November afternoon. Lot, halfway to her truck when she heard the helicopters. These early markings. 2 of them, moving fast and low over the Ridgemont skyline in a way that didn't fit any flight path she recognized. She stopped walking. Mint. A convoy of dark vehicles turned into the hospital's main entrance at the same moment. 3 black SUVs and a military transport moving with the coordinated precision of a unit that had done this 1,000 times. Armed personnel in tactical gear were out of the vehicles before they fully stopped, moving a stretcher from the transport with the specific urgency of people who had not come to wait. Siobhan turned and walked back toward the hospital. She had no badge, no authority, no reason to be there. Her feet moved anyway. Inside, the ER was chaos. The kind that looks like noise, but is actually structured panic. A uniformed woman was trying to explain something to Hartley, who looked pale. Tactical operators were standing against the wall, with the composed, watchful stillness of people trained to manage their own adrenaline. On the stretcher, a man, mid-40s, military kit, and blood soaked through field dressings on his left side. Dr. Siobhan recognized Dr. Pemberton, senior emergency physician, good on paper, brittle under pressure, was calling for labs and IV access in a voice that was climbing half a register too high. Siobhan looked at the patient. Something in her chest went very still. She knew him. The face was older, harder. There was gray at his temples that hadn't been there before. But the bone structure, the particular set of his jaw, she knew him. Thierry Lacombe. Except the rank insignia on his vest didn't read Master Corporal anymore. It read Warrant Officer. Armed lease. She'd met him 8 years ago in a place she wasn't supposed to name. During a tour she'd spent 3 years trying to metabolize into something that didn't wake her up at 2 in the morning. Romantic as moon. He'd come into Herd Station with a fragment wound that everyone else had dismissed as superficial. She'd kept him there for 6 hours, arguing with the shift commander and insisting on imaging that the commander said they didn't have time for. The imaging had found a small arterial bleed. He'd been medivist to Kandahar. He'd lived. To snatch, and she pushed through the cluster of staff. Excuse me. Someone started. Come on. His pressure, she asked. Operators. A woman, early 30s, sergeant stripes, blood on her sleeve that wasn't hers, answered automatically. 82 systolic last read. Dropping. Was implied. How long since the field dressing was applied? Minutes. 40 minutes. Pemberton's head came up. Who is this? Spolay. When did he last have urine output? Siobhan was already at the stretcher, her hands reading the abdomen before the question finished. You can't. Is rigid. She looked at Pemberton. He's bleeding internally. Left upper quadrant. This isn't the thoracic wound. That's been packed. This is something else. You need to call surgery now. Not for a consult. For an OR. I need you to step back. No. Namadi? His pressure is 82 and dropping. You have maybe 4 minutes before he arrests. She met Pemberton's eyes. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to look at the monitor and decide. Come in. Pemberton looked at the monitor. The number read 78. A tall man in a colonel's uniform stepped into the bay. He was maybe 55, built like a man who'd never stopped doing PT, with the kind of face that processed information and didn't telegraph conclusions. His name tag read Beaumont. What's the situation, he said. Renal hemorrhage, Siobhan said without looking up. Splenic or hepatic. The field dressing masked the presentation. He needs the OR. Beaumont spoke. Beaumont looked at her for one long second. Then he looked at Pemberton. Do it. Pemberton's face went through 3 things in rapid succession. Then he reached for the phone. The surgery took 4 hours. Siobhan waited in the family consultation corridor with 2 operators who didn't speak, and Beaumont who did. On staff here, he said. It wasn't a question. I was until this morning. Background? What's your background? She hesitated. Nursing. Military. I did 2 tours as a medical technician with the CF Health Services. Slowly. Which unit? In a sealed. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Something more like recognition. He pulled out a tablet and typed for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. Her own face looked back at her. The photo was 8 years old, taken at CFB Petawawa before her first deployment. Below it, Corporal Siobhan Doyle, medical technician, 1 field ambulance. Meritorious Service Medal, 2 operational tours. Honorable release. That, another document. Commendation reports. Incident summaries. 1 photo from a forward operating base somewhere in Kandahar province. 2 soldiers squinting into the sun, covered in dust. She remembered the day. She remembered not wanting to be photographed. The other person in the picture had insisted. Officer Thierry Lacombe. Beaumont? You disappeared after release, Beaumont said. And I didn't disappear. I came home. You changed provinces. Changed your name back to your mother's maiden name. Stopped participating in veterans networks. He closed the tablet. We noticed. You've been watching me. We've been aware of you. He set the tablet down. There's a difference. And him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. We'll get to that. When the surgeon emerged, Beaumont stood. Siobhan stood beside him, without deciding to. Invite. He's stable, the surgeon said. Ruptured spleen, significant blood loss. He'll need time, but he's going to make it. Nodded once. Beaumont nodded once. One of the operators, the sergeant with blood on her sleeve, pressed her eyes closed for a moment, then composed herself. On gear. Beaumont turned to Siobhan. He's going to want to see you when he's out of recovery. And he doesn't know I'm here. And he will. Beaumont paused. And we need to have a conversation. Agnes and Rifle spoke. They sat in the same consultation room where Siobhan had once watched families receive the kind of news that reorganizes a life. Beaumont pulled up another file on his tablet. Arby. You've filed 11 written complaints to the Provincial Patient Safety Office in 8 months, he said. Yes. Ridgemont, General specifically. Understaffing. Equipment failures. Delayed care for veteran patients. It's non-tech to the 3 veterans died at this facility in the past year. Beaumont looked at her steadily. All under circumstances that should have been survivable. All with post-mortem reviews that concluded care was within acceptable parameters. Pan's jaw tightened. I know about 2 of them. Tell me. The first, a retired warrant officer, 67, admitted with a suspected TIA. Discharged before his imaging was complete, returned by ambulance 4 days later with a full hemispheric stroke. Pictures had been ordered by Pemberton. The imaging results had been available, but not reviewed before release. She'd found this out by asking the ward clerk, who'd processed the chart, who'd told her in the break room, and then asked her not to repeat it. A former reservist 51, who'd come in through the ER with abdominal pain and been triaged as low priority. He'd waited 6 hours. His appendix had perforated. He'd died from sepsis on day 3. Beaumont listened without interrupting. Then he said, the third one you don't know about involved a member of our unit. Someone who came through this facility 8 months ago, before you started here, under circumstances that the hospital classified as a routine post-operative complication. He paused. It wasn't routine. Tennyson, such and said nothing. Prentice has been falsifying utilization reports to the ministry for 4 years, Beaumont continued. Inflating staffing numbers, misrepresenting equipment maintenance, billing for services not rendered. Remember soldiers. The investigations branch has been building a file. Your complaints gave them a timeline they couldn't construct from internal records alone. He set the tablet on the table, recommended what investigators couldn't access. Elodger spoke. She felt something cold settle in her chest. You knew about this when you brought Lacombe here. Ridgemont was the closest facility to the incident site. But you also knew what I'd find. Beaumont met her eyes. We knew what you'd do with it. The silence was long. Outside, the ward continued its mechanical rhythm. A phone rang. Wheels squeaked. Somewhere, a monitor chimed. You used me, she said. I'm on a position. We gave you a position. You did the work you couldn't stop yourself from doing. An answer. That's not an answer. No, he said. It isn't. He leaned forward slightly. But Warrant Officer Lacombe is alive because you were here, and 3 families might get answers because you spent 8 months refusing to look away. I'm not going to apologize for that, but I am going to tell you that what comes next is your choice. From the doorway, Prentice's voice cut through the corridor. Monsieur Han. He was there with 2 men Siobhan didn't recognize, suits, not scrubs, with the careful blankness of people who manage liability for a living. Prentice's expression was the particular mix of injured authority and calculation that she'd last seen on his face this morning. To the GAN, Colonel Beaumont, I need to ask your personnel to vacate the clinical areas. This is a civilian facility and this facility is currently under federal health oversight review, Beaumont said. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. You'll receive the formal documentation within the hour. In the meantime, your full cooperation is required. Eyes moved to Siobhan. Something crossed his face. Not quite recognition of what she was, but the beginning of it. This woman was terminated from this facility this morning. She has no authority. Mine, Beaumont said. And Prentice turned to the suited men beside him. One of them stepped forward. Mr. Prentice, I'd advise you to... Man, and you are? Honor Newton, Federal Health Integrity Investigator. We've been reviewing Ridgemont General's billing and operational records for the past 6 weeks. He held up credentials. Mr. Prentice, we're going to need you to come with us. Then a soldier spoke. The color in Prentice's face moved through several shades before settling on gray. Honor emptied. Siobhan stood where she was. Beaumont looked at her. Go see Lacombe. He's in recovery. He's been asking for whoever saved him. The nurses don't know who he means. Woman, she did. A man. Lacombe looked like a man who'd spent 20 years in places that left marks and had made his peace with that. He was pale against the hospital pillow, tubes in both arms, but his eyes were clear. In, he looked at her for a moment. The gmotide. And then the corner of his mouth lifted. Well, he said. His voice was rough from the anesthetic tube. Knew it. Felt your hands. She stood at the foot of his bed. Auntie, you always pushed on the exactly wrong spot, he said. Nobody else does it like that. Like you're looking for something you know is there. Indeed, I was. My minion. He was quiet for a moment. You saved my life again. And you make a habit of needing it. For me, he almost smiled. Then his eyes went serious. Beaumont tell you everything? I meant most of it. And May, there's more. He shifted, winced. The 3 veterans who died here. There are files. Things that were removed from the medical record after the fact. Someone on Prentice's administrative team has been altering discharge documentation retroactively. Not just errors. Deliberate revision. At the utilization reports. Protect. And that. To protect more than that. He closed his eyes briefly. Prentice has a relationship with the provincial oversight body. A specific person on the accreditation committee have been running a loop. Ridgemont submits inflated performance metrics. The committee passes them without audit. Prentice generates billing based on those metrics. He opened his eyes. Monsieur spoke. It's been running for at least 3 years across 2 other hospitals in the region. Come on, the floor felt less steady than it had a moment ago. Herman, why are you telling me this? Because Beaumont's going to ask you to testify. Formal inquiry. Federal and provincial. His eyes didn't waver. And because you're going to say yes, but you're going to be scared, and I want you to know what you're walking into before you decide. A moment. She stood there for a moment. On him. What's the name? She said. On the accreditation committee. Imaman, he told her. Imaman? She drove home that night in the dark. Her apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in East Ridgemont that she'd chosen because it was anonymous and affordable, and close to a transit line she no longer used now that she'd been working nights. She sat on the couch without turning on the lights and looked at the city through the window for a long time. Not Tewick. Her phone had 17 missed calls, 3 from numbers she didn't recognize, 2 from her brother in Halifax who'd seen something on the news, 1 from a number she recognized as Beaumont's staff line. Come back. Besake's a new accreditation contact, she said. His name is Sorensen, Provincial Director of Health Facility Standards, Beaumont said. We've known for 4 days. We were waiting to see if Prentice would give him up voluntarily. And then, will he? My has an already not. And then she exhaled. What do you need from me? Mind region. Your testimony. A formal deposition before a federal inquiry panel. Everything you observed, documented, and reported during your time at Ridgemont General. He paused. It will mean your name is on the record. Publicly. Everything about your service, your release, your suspension, all of it becomes part of the file. And suspension, I'd manufactured. It was manufactured. The complaint that triggered it came from a physician at your previous hospital who we now believe had a financial relationship with Prentice's network. We've been working with the nursing college to have it reversed. Another pause. That should have happened months ago. It didn't, because the process was deliberately slowed. That's also part of the inquiry. Siobhan sat with that for a moment. When? May, 2 weeks. Fine. And sat in the dark for another hour. Then she opened her laptop and began writing. Not for the inquiry, for herself. She wrote about the man in room 704 and his yellow flag. About the defibrillator with the 14-month sticker. About the reservist who'd waited 6 hours. And on for she wrote it. The way she'd been trained to write incident reports. Clinical, sequential, without editorializing. Because that was the only way she knew to hold things that were too heavy to carry any other way. Merston. She wrote until 3 in the morning. Then she slept. The next 2 weeks moved differently than the 8 months before them. There were meetings with federal investigators who recorded everything and asked precise questions. A lawyer from the Department of Justice who walked her through what testimony at an inquiry meant and what the limits of her obligation were. A call from the nursing college that lasted 40 minutes and ended with an administrator telling her that her registration would be fully reinstated, retroactively, with a formal letter of apology from the college within 30 days. At a Ridgemont General twice. Not to work. She had no role there yet, but to follow up on the patients whose files she'd flagged. The man from room 704 had been discharged. His daughter had sent a card to the hospital that had ended up at the front desk without anyone knowing who to give it to. A ward clerk had kept it in her drawer. She gave it to Siobhan. Siobhan read it in her truck. Otter spoke. We don't know exactly what you said or did, but the cardiologist told us that if the imaging had been delayed another 24 hours, my father might not have survived his procedure. He's home now. He made Christmas dinner. Thank you. God, in the glove box. She put the card in the glove compartment and ran 5 kilometers on the treadmill she'd bought in September and never used until now. The acquisition happened on a Tuesday. A federal government building in downtown Ridgemont, 8th floor. A room with windows that looked out over the river. Beaumont was there. 2 federal investigators. A court reporter. The legal team for the inquiry panel. And, in a development that Siobhan had not been informed of in advance, a representative from the families of 2 of the 3 veterans who had died. She recognized the woman immediately, not because she knew her, but because she had the face of someone who had been carrying something for a very long time and had come here to put it down. Her name was Patricia Okafor. Her husband had been the warrant officer, the one with the missed imaging, the TIA that became a stroke. And then Oster spoke. Siobhan gave her testimony for 4 hours. She spoke about what she had observed, what she had reported, what responses she had received, and what had happened to the patients whose care she'd flagged. And she was precise. She didn't editorialize. She didn't raise her voice. When the Inquiry Council attempted to reframe her observations as the grievances of a disgruntled former employee, she responded by citing specific dates, specific documentation, specific outcomes. You were not a registered nurse during your time at Ridgemont? Council noted. Commissions, that's correct. So your clinical observations were observations. I didn't practice nursing during that period. I mopped floors and filed written complaints through the proper provincial channels, which is something anyone can do. She looked at him. The complaints were accurate. That accuracy is what's at issue, not my registration status. In light, counsel moved on. At the end of the 4 hours, Patricia Okafor asked to speak. The inquiry chair allowed it. It wasn't protocol, but it was allowed. Okafor spoke for 8 minutes. She described her husband, 31 years, in the Canadian Forces. 2 operational tours, retired to Ridgemont to be near their grandchildren. She described the TIA admission, the confusion about the imaging, the discharge, the return. She described what a massive stroke looks like in someone who was well last week. She described what the last year had been like. I met at Siobhan when she finished. Nuddy. I don't know if it would have made a difference, Okafor said. We'll never know that. But I know someone tried. I know someone kept trying for 8 months in a building where trying was actively discouraged. Her voice was steady. That matters. Someone was quiet, the room quiet. Come on. Sofan didn't trust herself to speak, so she nodded. Glenhausen. Prentice entered a guilty plea 6 weeks later. The charges included healthcare fraud, falsification of public records, and criminal negligence contributing to patient harm. Sorensen was charged separately. At the provincial level, 3 other administrators at 2 affiliated facilities were also charged. The nursing college's letter arrived on a Wednesday. It was 2 pages, formal, with an apology in the second paragraph that had clearly been reviewed by legal counsel and was therefore careful without being warm. It reinstated her registration fully and without conditions. Command. She read it once and put it in a folder. Beaumont called that afternoon. There's a position. Messon, I figured there might be. Of nursing services. Ridgemont General is under new administrative oversight. They need someone who knows the building, knows the problems, and can't be pressured. A brief pause. The board has made a formal request. Siobhan looked out her apartment window at the gray December sky over Ridgemont. I have conditions, she said. I expected that. She listed them. Full clinical authority over nursing staffing decisions. A direct reporting line to the federal oversight body for a minimum of 2 years, mandatory veteran patient advocacy as a standing service, and a review of every patient outcome file from the past 4 years conducted by an independent clinical team. Beaumont said he'd relay them. The board accepted all 4. Monday, she started the following. The first morning she walked onto Ward 7C in nursing scrubs instead of a porter's uniform. The ward clerk looked up and stared for a moment, then said, "Morning, Director Doyle," with the particular tone of someone recalibrating. He was still there. The charge nurse. She stood at the nursing station with her arms crossed and an expression that was working hard to be neutral. Siobhan walked over. I need a full audit of outstanding imaging requests. Everything flagged pending for more than 72 hours. I want it on my desk by noon. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, Director. Later in the supply closet. Needs a service call. Today. Lily's expression shifted. Something complicated moved through it. I'll make the call. He nodded and moved on. Come on Ward 4 in the late morning. He was sitting up, the color back in his face. A physiotherapist putting him through a range of motion assessment. When Siobhan appeared in the doorway, he dismissed the physio with a look, and she obliged. Come on, Director, he said. Women, don't. He smiled. How's the first morning? I found 4 pending imaging flags that have been sitting for over a week. 2 patients who need medication reviews that nobody's scheduled. And a crash cart in the procedure room with a checklist that hasn't been initialed in 6 days. Come on, so normal then. For what this place was, yes. She came further into the room. It won't be normal for long. And he nodded. Then, more quietly. I'm being discharged Thursday, back to the unit by the new year if rehab goes well. He paused. You going to be okay here? Irna spoke. I've been okay in harder places. He was quiet for a moment. The families who testified, Okafor. I know. She called the unit. Wanted to thank the people who brought Lackham here. I told the administration coordinator to give her your direct line. He looked at her. Is that all right? Come on. Yes. Spoke. She's setting up something, a foundation maybe, for veteran patients in civilian facilities. She wants someone on the board who understands both sides. Didn't answer immediately. Not to the miss. Tell her I'll call her. Minen. That evening, she stayed late, going through 4 years of outstanding patient outcome files. The independent clinical team wouldn't start until January, but she wanted to understand the shape of what she was dealing with before they arrived. Insistiment. The files were dense and sometimes inconsistent in ways that were clearly deliberate and sometimes inconsistent in ways that were just ordinary institutional chaos. She made her own notes in the margins. Handwriting she always had. At 9:30, the ward was quiet. A skeleton crew, the particular stillness of a hospital at night. Not empty, just contained. She walked the floor once before leaving, checked the supply closet. The defibrillator had a fresh service sticker. The date was today's. An officer spoke. She stood there for a moment, looking at it. Meet in the Dan. Then she put on her coat and walked to her truck and drove home through Ridgemont in the dark. A week later, she got a letter, handwritten, forwarded through the military records office. The envelope was postmarked Ottawa, and the handwriting on the outside was careful in the way of someone who doesn't write letters often and wanted to get it right. Inside, the 2 pages from the family of the reservist who had waited 6 hours in the ER, his wife. She'd heard about the inquiry through the veteran community. She'd read about the charges. She'd read about the director of nursing who had filed 11 complaints in 8 months from a porter's position. Ahmad, she wrote. I don't know if anything you did changed what happened to my husband. I've thought about it. I've stopped trying to work out the arithmetic of it. What I know is that you saw him. You saw him as a person who deserved better, not as a file, not as a number in a wait list, not as an inconvenience. That's what I needed someone to do. I needed someone to see him. Maine. Sayoban read the letter twice. Then she put it in the folder with the nursing college letter, and the deposition transcript, and the card from room 7 and 4's daughter. And she put the folder in the top drawer of her desk in the office that used to be Prentice's, and was now hers. It was getting heavy. She didn't mind the weight. 3 years later, she was invited to speak at a national conference on veteran health transitions. She almost declined. She said yes, because Beaumont asked her to, and because Lacombe sent her a text message from somewhere. He couldn't name that said only, you should go. You're the only one who'll say the actual thing. And with rifles spoke. She stood at the front of the room and looked at the people looking back at her, nurses and physicians and administrators and veterans advocates, and a row of people in uniform near the back. She said, I spent 8 months mopping floors in a hospital that was hurting people. I didn't do it because I had a plan. I did it because I couldn't not look. And I think that's the thing nobody talks about in healthcare, or in the forces, or anywhere you serve, that the training doesn't leave you. The part of you that looks, that can't stop looking, is the thing nobody else flagged. That doesn't come out of the uniform. It comes with you, drawn in. And it will get you fired, and it will cost you things, and it will mean you see problems that you can't turn away from in places where looking closely is deeply inconvenient. Said she paused, and it will save someone's life. Multiple someones. Sometimes it will be too late, and you will carry that. But it will also save lives, and you will carry that too. And eventually, you learn that carrying things is not the same as being crushed by them. It's just the cost of seeing clearly. She looked at the row of uniforms near the back. Don't stop seeing clearly, even when, especially when, they tell you to look somewhere else. Come on. She stepped back from the podium. The room was very quiet for a moment. Then it wasn't. Forward, Patricia Okafor found her in the hallway. The Morrison Foundation had been renamed. It was the Okafor Institute now. She'd explained on the phone months ago, because she'd wanted her husband's name on something that kept growing. It worked in 6 provinces. Siobhan was on the board. In a speech, Okafor said. Lacombe's going to say it was too short. Lacombe says everything is too short, Okafor smiled. He texted me from wherever he is to say he watched the live stream. Siobhan shook her head. They walked out of the building together into the late afternoon. The conference was in Vancouver this year, and the light over the water was the kind that made you understand why people lived here. Cold and clear and going gold at the edges. Siobhan stood for a moment looking at it, pulling gears. She'd spent years trying to be someone who didn't notice things, who could pass a yellow flag and keep walking, who could hear a wet, rattling breath and not turn around. She'd tried because it seemed easier, because noticing had a cost, and the cost had once seemed like more than she could manage. Now noticing, she knew now that she'd about the arithmetic. The cost of noticing was real, but the cost of not noticing was borne by someone else entirely, and she'd understood somewhere in the middle of 8 months of mopping floors and filing complaints that went nowhere and then went somewhere after all, that a person could spend their whole life trying to make themselves smaller so that the accounting stayed clean. Or a person could take up the space they'd actually earned and do the work that space required. And saved everyone. She had tried and failed and tried again, and that was the whole of it. Not a story with a clean ending, but a practice, daily, imperfect, necessary. Her phone buzzed. A new patient safety report from the Ward 7C lead. Something flagged overnight, pending her review. Siobhan put her phone in her pocket and turned to walk back inside. A moment in Siobhan's story that I keep coming back to. Not the deposition. Not the arrests. The moment she stood in a supply closet and told a charge nurse, quietly, that she'd stay in her lane, and then went back to the corridor and kept watching anyway. That's the part that stays with me. Spoke. I think about what it actually costs to keep seeing clearly when everything around you is designed to make looking away feel reasonable. Siobhan wasn't operating from some dramatic sense of mission. She was mopping floors. She was filing complaints that went nowhere for months. She was the person in the room that nobody thought to thank, because the room had decided she didn't count, and she kept going. It would matter. Not because she was certain it would matter, because she couldn't make herself stop. I'd call integrity, not the word on a plaque, but the actual thing, the private decision, made over and over with no audience, to act in accordance with what you know is right, even when the cost is yours alone to bear. Siobhan paid that cost for 8 months before anyone validated a single thing she'd done. She didn't know Beaumont was watching. She didn't know her complaints were building a federal case. She just knew that the defibrillator sticker said 14 months, and that mattered. And she was going to write it down. What strikes me about her is that the intelligence she brought to this wasn't loud. It was observational. It was the kind of thinking that comes from genuine attention, from actually looking at the patient in room 704 instead of past him, from reading the pattern in a yellowed flag instead of accepting the official explanation. That kind of clarity is its own discipline. It's not something that happens to you. It's something you practice, especially when you're tired, especially when the institution is telling you your observations don't qualify. Then there's the persistence. I don't mean the dramatic kind, the kind that looks good in a story. I mean the unglamorous kind, 11 complaints over 8 months. Each one written carefully, correctly, sent into what felt like silence. Each one an act of faith that somewhere, somehow, precision and truth would be enough. They were. Eventually, and didn't know that when she was writing complaint number 4, or 7, or 10, she just kept going, because stopping felt worse than continuing. And Sorensen, and the whole network around them, is that their system relied on people getting tired. It relied on the calculation that the cost of speaking up would eventually exceed the cost of silence. They weren't wrong that people make that calculation. They just miscalculated Siobhan. Really understood, maybe without naming it, is that the cost of not looking is always paid by someone else. It's just that the ledger is kept somewhere you can't see. The man in room 704 almost paid it. Okafor's husband paid it completely. And Siobhan, mopping the floor outside their rooms, chose to be the person who kept the actual count. Scared. I don't think she'd call herself brave. I think she'd say she just couldn't stop noticing. But I've come to think that's the same thing.